Okay guys, so on the channel, I often present a lot of gear for astrophotography, and it can range from cheap or let's say less expensive cooled astrophotography cameras to very expensive telescopes like the SQA85 from Ascard I reviewed recently, and I'm also soon going to test out the SQA106, which has an eye-watering price tag. But I realized that in terms of the actual optical telescopes, especially when it comes to refractors, I haven't been reviewing or testing anything that is also, relatively speaking, cheap. At least when it comes to large-ish type of refractors. I've presented Newtonian telescopes, which are the kings of budget to aperture. I've presented the Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes with hyperstar lenses. I've presented some small refractors like the SQA55, but what has been missing is larger refractors that are also at the same time somewhat cheap. And this is what I have here. This is a cheap doublet ED refractor with FPL 51. I don't remember the name of the glass, but it's like kind of the lower quality glass that you can buy. It's SVBony 503-102 ED telescope. So doublet, not very good glass, but it has 102 millimeters of aperture and 714 native millimeters of focal length for a native focal ratio of f7. The telescope on its own at the default price costs $599 US. And I don't know about how the tariffs are going to impact that, but at least right now on the SVBony website, it's $599 US. But it seems to always be on some kind of sale, so I always see significantly lower prices for that. And then you also have a set with a focal reducer that also acts as a field flattener, which is essential for APS-C size cameras or for full frame cameras, although it doesn't support that. I'm still going to test it with that, and we'll look at the results. But the kit for basically a full astrophotography setup where you have a telescope with 102 millimeters of aperture with, including the reducer, a focal length of around 570 and a focal ratio of roughly 5.6, which is pretty good. This whole kit costs $740 US at the normal price, but again, I see it on sale on the SVBony website all the time, considerably cheaper, almost too good to be true. Hey, quick from the future here. Just a quick word that if you're in the United States and you're wanting to buy this telescope from SVBony, I have a coupon down in the description as well. And with all of those tariffs things going on, who knows what the heck you'll be paying in terms of price once the telescope arrives. And I don't know how the tariffs will, work logistically speaking. Like, where exactly are they taken? Will you be asked when the thing arrives at your door? I have no idea. So I can't really say much about that, but I have heard from SVBony, and I read from their email, to thank all our US customers for their support, and out of concern for our US customers, our team has decided that for all US customers who purchase the SV503-102 before April 18th, we will cover all tariffs. After April 18th, US customers will need to cover the tariffs themselves. Now again, I don't know what the logistics of all of that are. I don't even know enough about how the tariffs are being applied to know whether this makes any sense or not. But just FYI, this is what is being said, at least by SVBony. But at the same time, remember that if you don't need it, don't buy it. Don't feel pressured to buy it just because there's this kind of time limit, which is a standard sales tactic, right? So just FYI, this is what I heard from SVBony. Okay, back to the video. But anyway, with that, you can see that this is a cheap thing. So let's look at what, when I say cheap, relatively speaking, compared to premium triplet telescopes and with better glass, etc., etc. But what does those $740 US give us, at least at the base price, and usually much lower than that? So first, they give us a field flattener / reducer, right? So we get the usual stuff, and it's, bare bones. You get the field flattener in there with dust caps on both sides, and this is not a screw-in type of flattener. This is a slot-in type of flattener, just to be slotted into a 2-inch focuser barrel. But you're not here to see a reducer, you're here to see the actual telescope. So let's have a look at that little thing. Again, the packaging is very bare bones. It's just foam enclosing the telescope, and that's it. There's no case, there's nothing like that. The box can be used as a case, but it has no handle, no dedicated case, etc. So still, we get this thing here. This is what we get. We have like everything we expect from an astrophotography telescope, and it's surprisingly light. It feels lighter than it should, but after all, it's like an empty tube of aluminum with some lenses at the front, and it weighs, I think, 5.7 kilograms. It comes with some very decent rings to really grab the scope and keep it in place. A decent Vixen-style dovetail bar, which seems to be about 20 centimeters, maybe a bit more than that. And we have a 2-speed focuser as well, as we would expect. And what is very interesting, by the way, with this 2-speed focuser is that for me, this knob here, the fine focus knob, did not work at first. It didn't do anything when I turned it. And it was simply because this screw here, this little worm screw in the ring there was not tight enough. So I just tightened it and then it started working. So if that ever happens to you, you know what to do. And after that, the focuser is extremely smooth. It's like exactly as any nice focuser that I've used. And we have the rail there in the focuser itself, and it works very well. Of course, I installed an electronic focuser on that, and it seemed to work fine. There's only one attachment point really, which is this screw here. So it's not as great as other telescopes, but it was okay as far as I could tell. And of course, if we look at the front, we have the lens cap, which is well fitted there. We have the inside of the telescope itself, and the lens hood itself is extensible and then retractable, and there are no screws to hold it in place, but as far as I could tell, it's very nice and grippy, so you don't really need any screws. It's just the right amount of tension to move it back and forth, so I kind of like that. And then you also have a rotator here with the screw, so you can rotate the whole assembly like that and then tighten the screw. I rotated it back and forth a bit and then took images, and you'll see the results of my test images, but I did not notice any tilt introduced by the rotator. And then, of course, you have the end of the telescope where you could put a diagonal to use for visual, which I haven't done because I'm really into astrophotography rather than visual, but I think that would be a perfect visual scope. Maybe great for something like a quark eyepiece, for instance, for solar observing, but that's something else. And you can just remove that compression ring. There it is. And what I did for my test is simply insert the focal reducer / field flattener in its place, tighten, and of course that gives you a secondary place where you can rotate things around, right? So you can attach your camera at the end. These are M48 threads, and just like rotate it around. So there's 2 rotation possibilities in there. And that's basically how I use the telescope. And I put it on the Skywatcher 150i that I have behind me because it's the one that has a pillar there, or a half pillar, so I can actually use it with a long refractor like that. Because my main worry was that I would get focus only when, the tube is super far out. Like I thought it would be something like this to get best focus, but actually, what I noticed is that I got best focus with the field flattener / focal reducer with the 55 millimeters of back focus. I got best focus when the focuser was racked out by only 0.5 centimeters, roughly to 1 centimeter. So it means that the length of the telescope, at least if you use it with the reducer / flattener, what you get out of the box is what you see is what you get, really. And I think I could actually use it without that half pillar, and it would still work perfectly fine. And so I've been testing it on the Wave 150i. And what did I test it with? I tested it with the ZW2600MC Air camera that has the ESI Air integrated. So the whole setup basically looked like this. And in best focus, something like this. That was the whole setup in best focus. I tried it with focuser, but also manually using a Bahtinov mask from Optical, and that's an APS-C size sensor, because this is, in theory, the maximum that this supports. Also, for the fun, for giggles, I took out my Toptech Sky Eye 24 AC, which has a full frame sensor in there, with, of course, a luminance filter in there. And I also tried it out with this to see, like, could it maybe support, to some extent, full frame? And probably not, but yeah, I wanted to see the result. And let me tell you a bit about the expectations that I had for the scope. This is, as I mentioned, a doublet telescope with cheap glass FPL51. So I knew it was going to get chromatic aberration, which is typically, basically, you see purplish rings around the brightest stars. So that was what I was expecting. But because it's such a cheap telescope, and it's, it's like the focal reducer at the end is not screwed in, it doesn't scream high quality, it comes bare bones, etc. I also expected the star shapes to break down very quickly when you got off axis, basically off from the center of your sensor. So I expected the corners of APS-C to be terrible, because I've seen a lot of triplet APOs that have decent but not great stars in the corners of APS-C. And so I expected to see the same, plus the chromatic aberration. So I did my usual test of pointing this to some random star, bright star in the sky, and taking 60 times 1 minute exposures on that star, stacking them, and that way we have 1 hour of data, and we're able to gauge really very well the chromatic aberration with color cameras in each time. So it's the color camera is kind of the worst case scenario, because all of the wavelengths are being captured by the camera at once, and you know which is which, basically. So using color cameras like that, all of those tests were done. I also took some images of the UFO Galaxy with the 2600 MC Air, and we can go inside to have a look at the results. Now, before we do so, don't forget, if you want to support me, you can like the video. It really helps the channel out, and let me know what you think the results will be with this telescope down in the comments. Maybe you have this telescope. What do you think of it? Do you have one of its smaller siblings? There's like an 80mm version, for instance. Is it good? Let us know down in the comment. Or would you have other suggestions, recommendations instead of this, in terms of a refractor of this size for that kind of price? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you want to support me even more, because it is a lot of work to make all of those videos, and you're planning on buying anything from SVBony, Amazon, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links I have in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. And if you want to become a direct sponsor of the channel and help me actually make these videos, you can become a channel member using the join button next to the subscribe button, or a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the video description. Some of my Patreon ranks have access to my videos early and without ads. You guys, you are all rock stars. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. By the way, this telescope is on loan from SVBony. I asked SVBony whether I could review it, because I wanted to review a cheap telescope, and I had no idea how well this would perform. So I wanted to test, and I received it from them directly, and at the end of the testing period, I will return it to them. Anyway, with that, let's get inside and see those results. Okay, we're inside, and we can have a look at the results of the telescope. Before that, I want to quickly look at the type of field of views that we can expect to get, and I have here the example of the Great Orion Nebula, and the red field of view is the field of view you would get with the reducer on this telescope with an APS-C size sensor, so like the 2600 MC Air camera, which, by the way, the guide chip is far outside of the image circle of the telescope, but still worked perfectly fine, at least with a luminance filter. I did not test it with a narrowband filter, because we'll see there's a bit of light fall off. But otherwise, if you're going for a smaller sensor, and have the other extreme, kind of like the 585 MCR sensor, then we're zooming in much more. And this is a very nice 771 focal length. And with the 585 sensor, you have like 1 arcsecond per pixel, which is, for a lot of regions and seeing, kind of like a sweet spot in terms of the sampling rate that you want to have, even with the 2600 MC. Or let's add something like the 533 There we go, the 533 would be the green one there. We have a sampling of 1.36 arcseconds per pixel. So this kind of refractor is a really cheap way to get the right sampling and a really cool kind of field of view to work with. And it's a nice upgrade from a small refractor when you want to go deeper into your targets. That said, if you're going to go from a very high quality small refractor, let's say a Redcat 51 or an SQF 55, and you suddenly go to a doublet with cheap glass, you're in for a shock to some extent, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So that's the example of the field of views. Let's look at the actual result, and this is what I get with 60 exposures of 1 minute each on a star field with this SV503 102 telescope, the reducer / flattener, and the APS-C size sensor of the ASI 2600 MC Air camera. And immediately we can see that the brighter stars have this purple halo around them. I used the IR cut window that is integrated into the 2600 MC Air. I did not use any other filter. And this type of purplish halo is typical of doublets, especially with cheap glass. So up to here, this is exactly as per my expectations. And there's multiple ways you can deal with that. You can kind of deal with it a little bit with processing, but it's a bit painful to do so. Or you can use some filters that, instead of passing the whole 400 to 700 nanometer visible wavelength to your camera sensor, they kind of start a bit later, like 420, 450, whatever nanometers, and that cuts out a bit of the blue spectrum, so you lose something from your objects, but at the same time you avoid those halos to some extent. I don't have any such filter, so I wasn't able to test that. So this is like what you get in terms of the worst case scenario type of deal. And again, it's 1 hour of data, right? So a single exposure shows much less of that halo, but I'm using 1 hour of data so that we can see exactly what we can expect. Now, zooming in into the center of the field of view, the star shapes, they're perfectly good. They're nice and round and sharp, and everything is fine except the purple halo, but that's fine. Let's have a look at the corner stars. Let's say on the side. The star shapes, they're slightly getting like kind of square-ish, but they're still quite round, like really decent APS-C size on such a cheap telescope. And if we go top right, you can see the background gets darker, but again, the star shapes slightly elongated, but very, very decent still. Bottom right, it's also very slightly elongated, a bit less, but still quite round, maybe slightly out of focus, but very slightly. And if you keep going like bottom left, and even like the side, and then the top left, the stars are actually, again, slightly elongated with a lot of chroma. I mean, look at those stars in the corner. Like this area is red, this area is green, this area is blue. We have all the colors of the rainbow in our stars. It is beautiful. We can maybe do spectrophotometry with this. No, right, so it has its limits, but honestly, this is much, much better than what I was expecting. I was expecting the star shapes at the edge of APS-C to be complete and utter garbage, and they're not. So I was quite impressed by that. And I was so impressed I decided, like, hey, let's try with full frame. And with full frame, this is what I get. So full frame, we're really like, we're seeing the actual image circle of the telescope. This telescope cannot be used with full frame unless you're willing to crop something like this, which is still a bit better than APS-C, but yeah, don't expect to be able to use the full frame. And you know, it's if we zoom in, we still have like the blue halos. It's less visible because the dark corners actually force the auto stretch to brighten the center of the image more, and therefore the halos are less visible, but you can see on the main bright stars they're very visible. But again, if you go into the corners of full frame, like here you no longer have stars, but the star shapes in full frame, they're elongated, but they're actually quite decent. So the optical correction in terms of the spot diagram is not bad at all. It is, again, much better than I expected it to be. So very, very interesting results. I'm not going to bother with like the light fall off in the corners. This telescope is not made for full frame. It does not support full frame. This is just for the giggles and for the fun. Going back to APS-C, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take the luminance channel of this, and let's look a bit at the image once it's in black and white, and especially we're going to look at the values of the pixel. You see I have a value when I click here, that's the K value. You have X, Y, and K. So K at the very center is around 0.064. So I'll write it down, 0.064 at the center. This is the brightness value. Let's look at the corners. I'm going to find the worst corner. So here it's 0.0022. Here it's 0.0025. Here 0.0019. And here 0.0016. So 0.0016 is the worst that we can get. And so we can see that with an APS-C size sensor, there is a massive amount of light fall off. It so happens that 64 divided by 4 is exactly 16. So we have 4 times less light at the very edges of APS-C than at the center of the frame. So you can see that APS-C is very much the limit for this particular telescope. I would even recommend limiting yourself to micro four thirds. And I would personally go for my favorite sensor on the market right now, which is the 585, because then you're at the center. You have this perfect 1 arc second per pixel sampling and pixel scale. It is beautiful, and it would be perfect for this telescope. So APS-C, it can work, but not so great. 585, 533, 1600, 294, all of those sensors will perform great on this telescope. Now, I also took an image of the UFO Galaxy, and I want to quickly show you how it would look like. So this is the image, APS-C size sensor with flat calibration on the UFO Galaxy that you can see at the center. But you know, the corners actually, again, that's like, I don't remember, I think it's 3 or 4 hours of data. The corners are, those corner stars, they're not great, but they're really decent on APS-C. So that's, I think, again, very interesting. But we do have, like misshapen in the top left, but still pretty decent. We do have those very purplish halos. But you can see in my processing what I'll end up doing. I'll first do some cropping, so because I don't want to mess with the whole field of view when I just have the galaxy at the center. Then I want to remove the background, do some color calibration. So now we have like the natural colors, and you can see the purple hue around all of the bright stars. Then I reduce the stars via blur exterminator, then remove the stars. And on the stars being removed, I used the script from SETI Astro, which is free, called Halo Be Gone. And then I replaced the stars. And after that, this is what we got. So you can see there's a lot of progress by using Halo Be Gone. You can see there's like still the weird kind of halo around the stars. It looks like there was a weird deconvolution done, but you can see that with processing, we can, to some extent, take care of those purplish halos. So that was pretty nice. And then, you know, the usual stuff, resizing, noise exterminator, stretching the image, doing curves, and basically, like in the end, we end up with this, which is a decent image for a few hours of data from Tokyo. And then when we combined with stars, this is what we got with this cheapo telescope. We can still see like the purplish halo there, but it's, you know, decently controlled with some processing and some scripts. And that's what we get. And by the way, I combined the data from this telescope with data from another night with my CS150 Newtonian telescope and the ASI 585 monochrome camera. I used the luminance, and I placed the luminance, bam, onto the color data that I had taken with the SV503 102. And this is what we get. Again, from Tokyo, I think total imaging time with both cameras of 5 hours. not bad at all. But I think this gives you a good idea of what is achievable with this telescope and where it shines and where it doesn't shine. So first, for the price, it shines in the mechanics. The focuser is smooth once I had tightened one of those grub screws. The lens hood doesn't need any locking knob. It's fine. The focuser, by the way, the locking knob did not seem to shift the focus, at least not that I could notice with a button-off mask, so that's good. The rings, together with the dovetail, are surprisingly smooth, and that's another thing I forgot to mention. You can even rotate the telescope within the rings, and it's very smooth to do that, so you have like multiple areas when you can do the rotation. The built-in rotator for the focuser itself worked well and did not seem, at least to my eyes, to introduce tilt. And so mechanically it was much better than I expected. And then optically, we have the purple halos. This is exactly as expected, and this is what you need to know before buying one of those cheap telescopes. If you want like perfect stars with a decent focal length, type of stuff, like perfect stars across APS-C, across full frame, pinpoint, super sharp, you want the SQA106 by ASCAR, but it's like what, $3,000–4,000 US? Yeah, you could buy like 6, 7, 8 of those SVBony telescopes for the price of one SQA106, right? So it's definitely something that's interesting to look at. And I was actually impressed by the star shapes throughout the field of view. The light fall off on APS-C is very bad. We see like we only are left with 25% of the light at the edge of the frame of APS-C, but still with the 26 MC Air, which has these an off-axis chip for guiding, I was able to guide without any issues. And the star shapes were very good on that guide chip, and as you saw in the corners of APS-C and even full frame, the star shapes are decent. But again, my recommendation would be micro four thirds, so 294 1600 sensor, or smaller for this telescope. Still much better than what I was expecting for the purposes of astrophotography. So if you don't want to break the bank, but you still want to go deep into your galaxies for galaxy season, something like this telescope with, I would recommend a monochrome camera so you can separate the channels, and the halos that you saw would be a bit better. Something like the QHY Minicam 8 or the Toptech ATR 585 monochrome with the filter wheel and the filters in there. Together with that telescope, that gives you, in astrophotography terms, a somewhat budget equipment. Like you have, it's the telescope plus reducer. On the official listing price is around $700. You add the Minicam 8 or the Toptech camera with the filters, that's another $800. We're at $1,500 for the entire optical train, including the camera. And that's cheaper than a lot of mounts. So you can have a full rig that has a decent amount of focal length and does not require collimation, unlike a Newtonian telescope, for, let's say, if you get like one of the cheapo harmonic drive mounts, like the Huawei 17, which I have not tested, but it retails, you can get it for like $1,000, but you end up with a decent setup that can take galaxy images for a total of $2,500 US. I think that's pretty good, and that's what is very attractive with this type of telescope. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you own this scope? Let us know. Give us feedback, recommendations, tips and tricks for processing those halos out, recommendations of filters for those halos in the comments. Leave a like while you're at it. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new, in which case, welcome to the channel. And if you want to support the channel even more, and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, even Amazon or SVBony, I might be able to get a coupon for that scope. If I do, it's going to be in the description. But if you use any of my links in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. And of course, to sponsor the channel, to be a VIP, channel member, join button, or Patreon supporter, link is down in the description. Absolutely, you guys make the channel possible. Thank you so much for all your support. But with that, more important than any of that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.